to Let's Get Writing, the show that tells the stories behind the stories and introduces you to the writers you love. You can see all my shows on my YouTube channel at Catherine Taylor TV, and please subscribe and enjoy the content. Today's guest was born and raised on the South Side Road in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and she now works and lives as an uninvited guest in Peterborough, Nogijiwanong, Ontario, on Treaty 20 territory, the traditional territories of the Mississauga Ojibwe. She has published several novels, most recently Governor General's Literary Award finalist and Newfoundland Reads finalist, Urchin, and that was published with Running the Goat Books and Broadsides. Her latest publication is her debut short story collection called Ferry Back the Gifts with Exile Editions. And I could go on, but I'm not. I'm going to welcome Kate Story to Let's Get Writing and bring her up in the stream. Hi, Kate. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Catherine. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And you know, the one thing I want to do, because your name, I just love your name. What a great name for a writer, Kate Story. I mean, come on, your parents were just too kind to you. Your fate was sealed.
Yeah, it was. My mother was a writer too, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so you've got that wonderful name. And so now that I've gotten that out of the way, as I researched you and what you do as a writer and theater artist, what really struck me that you're almost fearless in how you create things and what you go out and do. You're certainly not stuck in a rut. You extend the boundaries and you switch your ideas, and then you're performing, and then you're writing, and you're doing plays. It's got to be exciting. But what makes you tick like that? Not everyone can do this.
I'm not even sure I can answer the question. I mean, first of all, I'd say I'm certainly not fearless. Like, I'm always worried about what's going on. I always feel like I don't know what I'm doing. And maybe there's some part of me that really thrives feeling that I don't know what I'm doing. So switching things up is one way for me to, it's just, it's not like I'm doing it consciously, like, oh, I need to stay engaged, I'm going to switch things up. It's just these ideas come to me, I'm just struck by them. And then it feels like, oh, this is a performance, or then this other thing, oh, this really feels like prose. And then it's like, I just have to do it. Yeah.
Well, you know, it's multi-talent though, when you think about it, because for each one, I mean, you have to get your head in a different space. So it's very, very interesting, which brings me to, what is your writing style? If you're, for example, we are going to talk about your book, Urchin, I'm getting there, but how do you approach your different projects? Are you someone who plans things out, or are you more instinctive? What's your style?
I definitely, I wouldn't call it planning. I think that's probably too grandiose a term for me. I spend a lot of time in the world of whatever is, in front of me, whatever the project is. And I do a lot of just taking notes by hand on paper, and writing and writing and writing, and just getting all these ideas out that always feel like they're coming in a sense. I don't want to sound too woo-woo. I've heard other writers say this, but it feels like like I'm discovering something that's already there in a sense. I feel like I'm an archaeologist and I'm just digging down through the layers, or maybe there's like a tide pulling out and there's a city underneath the water. And so I have to spend a lot of time kind of getting to know, what is this world? I generally know pretty early on whether it's performance or prose. It just has a different feeling, I guess, or it's coming from a different place. I don't really know. And then once I have all these notes, and then I start going through the notes, a lot of them end up going, into the recycling bin. And then I end up with stacks and stacks and stacks of these like scribbled notes. And then I put them in a certain kind of order. And then that's when I sit down and I start typing. So in a sense, it's research, but it's research into, I guess, my own imagination, although it doesn't feel like it really has anything to do with me. And in the case of Urchin, there was a lot of historical research, and in quite a few of my books, I've had to research as well, reality
research. But I think other writers, I'm just going to bring up the cover of Urchin because we're going to move into that. I think other writers understand completely when you say that there's just something that comes from inside that you tap into, whether it's back in our minds, things we've experienced or ideas that have stayed with us. That's what that says to me when I hear you say it. And it feels like, where is this coming from? And what are my instincts and how did this show up? And
Mhm.
there, there is some of that. I've felt it, and I think most writers would understand what you're saying. And it's
Good.
not
You
necessarily
don't
what
wanna sound like too out there, you know? It's
how our brains work,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
which is why I get along so well with all my guests.
yeah.
Now, here I brought up the cover of Urchin, and I should mention Veselina Tomova designed that. And she was a recent guest on the show, and she's a wonderful graphic artist, designer, and also now she's started writing books as well. So if anyone's interested, that show is on YouTube to check out. So tell me about the cover, and I also the name, because Urchin says so much. I immediately had a feel. But talk a little bit about that for me.
Well, first of all, I was really honored to have Veselina design this book. It's beautiful, and you can see the margins there. And then if you flip the book over, you know, when you have it, or inside even, there's little headings with these vines, and there's little red-capped people hiding in those vines.
Ooh.
A thoughtful, amazing design. And the card, the Jack of Spades does play a big role in the book. The main character, Dor, it's set in 1901, so there wouldn't have been they them pronouns in 1901, but chances are I would say Dor probably would go with they them if
Mhm.
born now. So Dor takes on this persona, Jack, and you can see on the card, and the crow is there. Oberon is the crow's name, talking crow. So
Ooh, right
this,
from Midsummer Night's Dream,
yeah,
Oberon.
totally, totally. So this cover does so much in terms of conveying the sensibility of the book, and I just love it.
Yeah, and now that you mentioned it, I didn't even get the Jack of Spades. Here I am looking at it. It looks like a card, and it just hit me now. I loved the crow, by the way. It was such a great character.
Yeah, so
Um,
yeah, you've got to have an animal helper, then then
yeah,
you'll be okay. And the title, I was struggling. I'm not great with titles. I'm actually pretty terrible at coming up with titles. And I had a friend of mine named Charlie Pett. She's a wonderful poet, spoken word as well as page poet and performer as well. And Charlie is a trans person, and Charlie read the book. Brought on by Running the Ghost to do that, and for sensitivity reading. I don't identify as trans. I identify as genderqueer, and I wanted to make sure if there were young trans readers that the book wasn't, doing anything that I wouldn't want for it to do. So Charlie was wonderful reading it over
mhm.
me with that, and then it was Charlie. I said, "Charlie, help me! I need a title." And Charlie's great at that stuff. Urchin. I was like, "Oh my god, you're right. That's perfect. Thank
Yeah,
you."
I
So
think
many levels.
Charlie,
Yeah,
yeah, he nailed it.
totally, totally.
You bring out some really wonderful things. Like you have fairy lore. You referenced it in the little characters, and even Dor or Dorothea. Like she's a spy. She's an adventurer. She's dealing with Marconi. She's a gender questioner, which in 1901 are all pretty unusual things for a young person to be doing. But I loved that character
Yeah.
right from the get-go. I thought this is someone with a lot of spunk.
Yeah,
And
I loved her. I loved her, or them, but like, like I said, 1901, it's probably she
it's
called herself a she. But yeah, no, Door's very vivid for me. And the whole scenario where the being a spy and then this dressing in boys' clothing, and thus Door discovers an identity inside that perhaps, was just not conscious before that situation. And the whole thing felt like both very dramatic, but also really opening up a lot of possibilities, not only for Dora, but for me in a sense. And I was thinking a lot too, obviously I wasn't alive in 1901. So things were much more gendered in European societies, so in Newfoundland at the time too. And I couldn't find out if this was true or not, but in Newfoundland, but in a lot of places, it was actually illegal for women to wear men's clothes. And you could be jailed for doing that. So there's a sense of risk and danger there. So for somebody like Dor who is gender questioning, coming of age becomes very perilous, because she was going to
mhm.
be expected to start acting like a lady and the hair up and the dresses and everything else. So in that era, I think, nowadays you'd be able to go under the radar. Certainly in my lifetime, you'd be a quote unquote tomboy or whatever. That wasn't going to be an option for Doors. So it was pretty fun for me to sort of think about that scenario and how it's going to play out in Doors' life.
I would think it would have taken a lot of thinking how you were going to do it. And I saw a quote, and I'll read this. I never thought I'd see the day when a book featuring a misfit genderqueer kid from the South Side Road would be a finalist for a big award. And you were finalist for Newfoundland Reads, and as well, I'm thinking, what was the other award there? You probably remember
the Governor General's
very big award, the Governor General's Award. And I saw that was a quote that came from you that would happen. And so, what did it mean to you when you received that recognition for this book?
Well, that quote came out of me because I was just so surprised, because I grew up as a genderqueer kid on the South Side Road, right? And like I just didn't have that language for it when I was growing up. I didn't know. I just knew that there was something wrong with me. That's what I knew. I couldn't be a girl. I really admired my friends who were good at being girls. I was thought, oh, that's wonderful. She's so pretty, and she knows how to deflect, if a fella is being a bit rough or whatever, knows how to deflect it with flirtation. I was like, how does she know how to do that stuff, And admired that. And I also admired fellas for being fellas. And I just, and that I had guy friends who were maybe like me. I don't know how they identified it themselves, but felt a little more like they weren't just the macho dude. And I just, I don't know if all kids are like this. Probably. I thought everyone else knew how to do this stuff, and there was something wrong with me that I just didn't know how to do it. And I thought, oh, gender's like a costume. I always just thought, oh, it's a performance. Okay, so maybe I can learn how to do it. Now, I was never that successful, but it might be one of the reasons performance felt like a really comfortable place for me from a really young age. And I just had the most amazing dance teachers, too. I had Phyllis Angel first.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, she was wonderful. And then she was so pretty. I just loved her. And Gail Innes was great. And Linda Rimsey, what an inspiration. Sandra Blackmore. And they were just all very accepting of all of us as who we were and what we were doing. And they gave us lots of opportunities to choreograph, for example, like Linda and Gail. Gail in particular taught a course in choreography. And so from quite a young age, we were creating our own work. So I think I could explore, in a sense, who I was through performance. So it just cemented that idea that gender's a kind of performance. And as I got older, I realized, no, actually not everyone experiences that way. I think some people are quite comfortable in their assigned gender at birth, And it wasn't that I was doing anything wrong or that I was bad at it. Well, I was bad at it, but just that I was just maybe a little off, right? I wasn't at the ideal, and really nobody is, right? Like, we struggle with this. So for me, writing this book actually brought about a lot of revelations about my own self. And it might be one of the reasons that writing a younger protagonist and thinking about younger audiences was really enabling for me when I did this book, because I was taking myself back to that, just on the cusp of, am I going to hit puberty now? That time in my life was really difficult and, but also really exciting. It was full of possibilities. So, I think for me, it was I actually was discovering things about myself the same way Door was. In a sense, we were walking a parallel path.
And that was one of my questions. It's a young adult book, and it just seems like that's what it needed to be with that character. And I wondered, like, how much of you is reflected in the story. I think we all draw on our experiences, no question. We have to draw from somewhere.
Yeah, the gender and sexuality stuff definitely was pulling on me at that age from my life, because I felt too that it was really important for me not to write a story that I can't own at this point. It's like, I don't want to appropriate stories. And I think, as I said earlier, I think just the period does intensify a lot of that gender stuff in a way that I would just kind of, find safe people to be around. Whereas Door was going to be in trouble, I think, in 1901. But the reason it was, the whole thing came about, honestly, because of Marnie Parsons at Running the Goat.
Right.
And she really asked me, she said very specifically, I want you to write a young adult fantasy novel set in Newfoundland, historical, with fairies. That was the assignment, and I loved having an assignment. So I knew it was going to be for young audiences right from the get-go, and that it was going to be historical and set back home and all those things, and get the fairy Lorien. So, but beyond that, she gave me carte blanche. I could do whatever I wanted. So,
Well, I think Marnie Parsons is behind a lot of amazing books that are written, and a lot of amazing writers and artists, and I love the work that she inspires. And she does really play a role there. She
yeah,
really does.
huge,
But
huge.
yeah, and you also, I'm going to just switch up this image here and for a second because you have another book coming out, and then I want to go back to your performance. I'm
Okay.
on a roll here, and I'm going, where do I go next? Actually, we'll leave them both up. This is another book that's coming out right now, that short stories.
Yeah.
So yeah, so now you're into short stories. I rest my case.
Well, I actually the short stories, some of those stories are probably 25 years old, and some of them are more recent. I started writing short fiction. It didn't come easy to me. I write long. I tend to write really long, same way I talk. And so I had a couple of novels published, and then I thought, oh, with Killick Press, rest in peace, Killick Press. So I thought, oh, just to try to get some short fiction out there, just to keep myself writing. And it was hard for me to learn to write short stories. I just love the form. I really admire short story writers who are so good at what they do. But it's also fun because you don't have to spend quite as much time in each world. When you're writing a novel, you're really in there. Short story, I feel like I could go to more complex and sometimes uncomfortable for me, uncomfortable places because I don't have to stay there for a year or more.
Oh, mm.
So yeah, this is the first time. This is not all the stories I've had published, but it's quite a few of them, and it's the first time they've been in one place, and so it's pretty exciting for me, actually.
Very exciting. And is that book available now?
It is. It is. It's out
Mm.
with Exile Editions. Michael Callahan, Toronto-based publisher, and I was surprised when it came out. I guess again, I hadn't really thought about it. Here I am living in Ontario, but
Mm.
vast majority of them are set in Newfoundland, actually.
Mm.
So I thought, oh, well, that makes sense. It's where I'm from. I always think about home, all the time. It's inside me and it really inspires me, I guess, still. Wayne Johnston said once he could only write about home by leaving it. I don't know if that's true for me because, it's just how I live. But certainly, as we know, distance is helpful. Also,
Mhm.
comedy, right? What's that wonderful saying? Comedy is tragedy plus time. So I feel like I was like some perspective on my own life in a sense by stepping away from it. But yeah, I'm pretty excited about the collection.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope people enjoy it. Sometimes short stories are good too. I think especially with the pandemic, a lot of us, I certainly feel this, my attention span shortened. And so sometimes reading a short story is like, yeah, that's what I can handle.
Yeah, a short story is a whole other world. You have to just, yeah. I've not done it, but I certainly find interest in it. I like reading them, so
Me
I'm going to have to check out that book.
Yeah, I hope you
Now,
like it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I want to get to the theater artist part of you as well. So let me just pull this down. And you are going to be actually traveling in Newfoundland this fall in a performance called, what's it called? Anxiety. How could I forget that word?
Now I have to say right away, because some people are like, I don't want to come see it. I'm anxious enough. It doesn't make the audience anxious. I mean, you could bring your own anxiety to it, of course, but it's actually quite fun. Well, I could go on about why it's called anxiety, but yeah, the point of the show is not to induce anxiety in the
Good,
audience.
good point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right, so it's part of the Festival of New Dance in Newfoundland, and I love that you talked about your history in dance, and that also left a big impression on me growing up. We had Mrs. Sybil Barrett, who was a war bride from England, who brought us ballet and different dance that we probably never would have had, and we even took exams and all that sort of thing. So that can be tremendously important in someone's life as a form of expression. And it's interesting that it affected you much the way that it did me. So, what is the Festival of New Dance that's coming up in October here?
It's a wonderful festival. It's administered, has been for a number of years by Cala LaChance, Neighborhood Dance Works, and Cala. It's pretty competitive to get accepted. I'm super honored that this work was accepted into the festival.
Mm.
Um, And so yeah, Kala invited me to bring it out. I created it and workshopped it here in Peterborough, Noguchiwanong, and with my partner Ryan runs a small theater, and it's a great. It's called the Theater on King. Oddly enough, it's on King Street. Anyway, it's a wonderful place to workshop new work because it's small and it's a great, very supportive production infrastructure. So you can afford to fail. And I think that's just really important for artists because, if you start something going, this has to succeed, maybe that works for some people. For me, I just shut down. So I was able to play around. I presented it in progress and I, presented it again. And it came together actually, once we got it on its feet, it came together pretty fast. But I basically, it was a pandemic project. I started reading Beowulf. I thought I could read Beowulf. I was, the idiocy. But anyway, I was like, oh, yes, I'm going to open Beowulf. I'm just going to read it, not having studied Old English at all. So, of course, I can't read Old English. So I ended up reading, oh, God, probably 9 or 10 different translations of the poem. Parallel translations are my favorite because then you start to pick up some of the Old English words. And what a story. I mean, it's kind of a superhero story in a lot of ways. And it's one of the few texts we have in Old English. So what happened, was I just was reading Beowulf and I thought I was going to write this other thing, anyway, you know how it is when you're making something. You have all these beautiful ideas and you think they're great and they're beautiful, sweet pink balloon and up they go and they just pop and that's not what's going to happen. So it turned into what it is. And I didn't mean for it to be autobiographical and at all. And it just, my life wouldn't stay out of it, is I guess how I would put it.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've done performance pieces before that drew on my life. One was called Performances May Be Permanent. And it was about Glenn Gould and my mother, Alice Story, who my mother was a writer, as I mentioned before, but she was also a composer and pianist. And she used to compose and play for silent films at Memorial University Film Society.
Oh, wow.
Really fun. So I've done that piece and I actually took it back home as well. And so this one's more about, it's about me really, but also mentions my father, George Story, and growing up in a house where a dictionary was being created. So, and then Beowulf and the English language. And then of course, then we have to get into white supremacy because that's what's happening. And during the pandemic, we were seeing, and Trump and everything else. And it more and more of this horrifying to me and to many of us, just normalization of hate speech. So then I wanted to look at what is going on, and you said it's a lot of anxiety in a lot of these white supremacists. And I'm not saying who cries for the white supremacists at all. I'm just going like, what's going on? Why are they so worked up all the time? Why are they so worried about, this whole replacement theory, all this horrible stuff, right? So I'm looking at Beowulf and that culture and then what happened to the English and then thus us and how we keep importing the same invasional trauma that happened to us, my ancestors. We keep importing that ourselves and we've become the invaders, both linguistically and also, of course, culturally and economically. So it's about all of that, but believe it or not, quite entertaining, just a little over an hour. And I think the thing is really Beowulf is what makes it fun because, and there's some other fun stuff. I have lots of happy childhood memories as well as like difficult ones, like all of us, right? So I play all the monsters. It's just fun.
Interesting. And it looks like a bit of anxiety on your face.
Yeah. And the books become the characters.
Okay, very neat. And this is another one. You've got a gas mask on.
Grendel. That's Grendel. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, he likes to eat people. Oh yes. There's me. So I did an undergrad degree and I spent 3 months in graduate school. My father was this great scholar. My mother had her MA and she was a professor as well. There I am. So I put on this, it's a choir robe actually, but I'm, not making fun of my academic pretensions.
Yeah, that a little bit of pressure. And I brought up an image of the book, The Dictionary of Newfoundland English, and I see Rex Murphy's name up there. He's always where interesting things are being said and done. So this is great. Your father is it a lexicologist?
Lexicographer. Yes, a maker of dictionaries. Or as Samuel Johnson said, a harmless drudge. But yeah, he and John Widdowson and William Kerwin compiled and wrote the Dictionary of Newfoundland English. And it's just a wonderful book. I mean, it's scholarly, but it's also really moving, entertaining, hilarious. I mean, everything. It's a wonderful book.
Yeah, and it explains somewhat of why we talk the way we do and things we say.
Yeah,
Probably
yeah.
we should all have a look at it and to figure out, who we really are here in this island. We try to explain it. We try to explain it through the work we create, but I think we're very unique.
I think it's one of the reasons that Newfoundland and Labrador, we really
Yeah.
produce so many writers. Like we really hit above our weight. And I think
Oh,
it's partly our relationship to language. And you see it in that dictionary, it just the richness and variety of our ancestors' experience of the world as it comes out in language really comes through in that book. And my relationship to the English language is different than my people here on the mainland. Like
mhm.
I grew up, people all the time they'd say stuff, and I was like, I don't know, no idea what that person is saying, but boy, I like that word. I love how they just said that, and you would know, you'd pick it up, right? You'd be like, I think I know what that means. Whereas people in Ontario, Southern Ontario, anyway, tend to be a bit, I don't know what that means, and that's
Yeah.
the end of the conversation. And I think we just have a little more fluid, creative, medieval approach to English, I would
Yeah,
say.
I think you hit the nail on the head. For a small province, it's prolific, really, the number. And that's what I thought when I started this show. I'll have a dozen shows. I have like 190 shows and counting, and they're just going up. And I
Mm.
haven't even tapped. I could just keep going. So when you think about it, that's a fact that's just astounding. Now, before we wrap, we've shared a lot, and you've just been a wonderful guest and so informative. But CanLit for the classroom also chose Urchin as one of their 2022 selections, which was really great. And also another guest who I had earlier, a couple times on the show, actually, Susan Flanagan's book, The Two Degrees or The Degrees of Barley Lick, both by Running the Goat Books. And again, Marnie Parsons shows up here. Yay. Yeah. And so big congratulations for that, because it's getting out there where young people are able to read these books and open their minds and eyes to the possibility of becoming writers. Why
That's
not?
that's right. And I know for me, it would have meant a lot if there had been even one book about a gender queer, non-binary protagonist. Uh, Also falls in love with her best friend. So
Mhm.
I'm not saying I don't have like pretensions for Urchin, but I think it doesn't take much for a kid just to know, you just know you're not the only one.
Mhm.
There's a possibility that there are other people out there, and so I guess I would have that hope that Urchin might reach more kids who are wondering what's wrong with them.
Wonderful, wonderful way to end this show. And thank you for writing it. And also, thank you so much for being a guest.
Thank
I've
you.
really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you,
And,
Catherine. Thank you so
and to
much.
everyone out there, I hope you've enjoyed the show. And again, you can check them all out on my YouTube channel at Catherine Taylor TV and subscribe. Have a great day. And Kate, again, thanks. And we'll talk to you again soon. Bye, everyone.